Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for the delay, but we'll go ahead and try to get started here. And we'll start off with introductions. And so if the people in attendance could start, I think the microphone is up on the podium, if you would, and just kind of pass that around. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's green. Hearing me? Okay. I'm Tim DeFors. I'm one of the Missoula County Citizen Representatives.
My name is Jason Lindsay. I'm with the Western Montana Chaplains.
Thank you. I'm Angela Yantz with City Public Works Safety.
Eric Legvold, United Way, Missoula County.
I'm Julia Gore. I'm the Public Health Emergency Preparedness Coordinator for Missoula County.
Chris Clark, the Director of Plant Operations and Security at Community Medical Center.
Afternoon, Tim LaRoche, Missoula County Wildfire Program.
Ken Morris, Missoula Rural Fire.
Nick Hooper, Missoula Rural Fire.
Caitlin Nielsen, Emergency Preparedness Coordinator for St. Patrick's Hospital.
Tim Jacobs, Missoula CERT and County Citizen Rep.
Steffi Novak, Missoula CERT.
Marty Whitmore with the Weather Service.
Eric Hoover, Ravalli County.
Jeff Roderick, Ravalli County.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, we have the need to elect a vice chair. David Correa, who was representing St. Patrick's Hospital, has taken a different position and is no longer in Missoula, so we have a vacancy.
Do we have any candidates for this at this point?
You can call for nomination.
Okay. All right, I guess we're going to be looking for nominations for the vice chair. So does anyone have any nominations that they would like to offer at this point in time? Anyone? Nick?
I'll do it.
Okay, any other nominations, please? Okay. Then we have one nomination, Tim Jacobs. Okay, so we'll go ahead and vote on that. So everyone in favor of Tim Jacobs as the vice chair, please raise your hand. Okay, all right.
Welcome, Tim.
Welcome. Okay, next is any public comment that anybody may have before we get into the meat of the meeting.
Mr. Chair, I would take this opportunity to ask anyone online. I'm just going to call on somebody. We'll go back to Jeanette and see if we've got the audio fixed.
I can definitely hear you. Not sure. Okay, it looks like we're good.
Thank you. All right, sorry to interrupt public
No.
comment for that.
Okay, no public comment? Okay, we'll move on. Then we need to approve the minutes from last meeting. Does anybody have any edits, changes to the last meeting minutes?
Mr. Chair, the meetings were sent out to the LEPC membership a week ahead of this meeting. We received no correspondence with corrections or additions from that electronic transmission.
Okay, then we'll make a motion to approve last month's or the last meeting minutes. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Tim.
You got a second over there?
All right.
For vote.
Oh, second. Thank you.
We got a second call for a vote.
Thank you. All right, so next up is our community preparedness presentation by Ben Sharaf from the EPA. Ben?
Or should I walk around or just sit here? Okay. Did you get the PDF document, Nick? Yeah. For some reason, it's not sharing, but I have the. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben Sharaf. I'm one of the Emergency Planning Community Right to Know Act coordinators for the EPA in Region 8. Most of my work entails compliance assistance with local facilities, working with local emergency planning committees, such as yourselves. I also help put on trainings and exercises throughout the region. And then another part of my job is I'm the Response Support Corps coordinator in Region 8, and so I help manage a standing resource of EPA volunteers that are trained in various disciplines, trained in ICS that can deploy anywhere in the entire country at a moment's notice. They've been helping out with East Palestine quite a bit, Guam, the typhoon that happened there a little while ago, and now the Maui wildfires as well. So that's what I've been a little bit preoccupied with recently, but I'm hoping to get more into outreach. That was the main reason why I was hired for this position. I was previously a Peace Corps volunteer in Malawi in Southern Africa, and I did a lot of anti-poaching work there. And so I'm excited for this to be my first meeting in Montana. I've done a few LEPC meetings already in South Dakota, but I'm happy to be here, and it's much more beautiful than Denver so far, so much closer to the mountains, which is nice. So. Anyways, let's get started. So on the agenda today, I'll be mainly talking about EPA's spill response capabilities and the various mechanisms that we can use to hopefully help you all out, your communities out when there is a hazardous substance release or an oil spill of some kind. And so we can move on to the agenda slide here. Most of the information that I'll be talking about today comes from the National Oil and Hazardous Substance Pollution Contingency Plan, or the NCP, which is a lot shorter, and I'll probably be using that term much more frequently than that long sentence there. But anyway, that's essentially our guidebook to how we respond to hazardous substance releases and oil spills as well. It's basically our Bible, what we're going to be using to help you all out, get the various resources that you need out on a response. So I'll be first going over, what an incident looks like behind the curtains from the EPA's perspective and how that gets up and rolling. I'll be going over our legislative authorities, why we can do certain things and help you all out when that time comes. And I'll be going over the various components that make up our national response system to deploy resources and the various policies in place as well. Next, I'll be going over what an on-scene coordinator is, and for those of you that don't know what that is, they're essentially federal officials that direct and monitor hazardous substance release responses and oil spill responses as well. And so they're going to be the ones actually on the ground during an emergency that happens, working in unified command with your first responders, with the potentially responsible party. And then I'll finish up the presentation going briefly over what happened in Stillwater in Repoint a few weeks ago, or months ago, I guess now. And so that's what it's going to look like today. And so I thought I'd start off the presentation kind of giving you a behind the scenes, look at what the EPA does when a spill or release occurs and how they eventually get into the incident. And so let's pretend that there's been an oil spill, a hazardous substance release, a train derailment, some sort of incident that has occurred here in Missoula. Basically, what should first happen is the potentially responsible party should know to call the National Response Center. And the National Response Center is run by the U.S. Coast Guard. And by calling that number immediately within 15 minutes, that's what we define as immediately and what they should be doing. The National Response Center should then be reporting out to the states, contacting DES, contacting the EPA, and letting them know of the report that was just filed by the potentially responsible party. And that's actually your responsibility to make sure that the NRC has that phone number appropriately given for the state. And we were talking earlier with Nick, and he was kind of telling me that's not necessarily how the process works in Montana. And that's completely fine, and maybe he can talk a little bit more on that later on. But at least that's how we're going to get the information, the EPA themselves, for when a response occurs. And so, once the EPA is made aware of the situation and contacted, the phone duty officer, who is an on-scene coordinator, will essentially triage the incident. They're going to figure out what the heck is going on. They'll be contacting you, the local emergency planning committee, contacting the emergency managers, contacting the potentially responsible party, trying to determine what happened and if federal assistance will be needed. If it's an oil spill, they're actually required to deploy an on-scene coordinator. That's just by law. That's just what needs to happen. But if it is a hazardous substance release of some kind, basically we have discretion to whether or not we need to respond. And if you have a really strong HazMat team, we might not necessarily need to come out there, or if it's just barely over the reportable quantity and your county thinks that they can handle the cleanup themselves, we might not necessarily come. But if we are needed, we will deploy an on-scene coordinator, and they'll be following four main steps. They'll be looking at the size and nature of the spill, the potential hazards. They'll be looking at the resources that might be needed out on the response, and then whether they're the potentially responsible party or the first responders can handle the spill themselves. At that point, they'll either join Unified Command, but it's very unlikely that they'll federalize the incident. I just want to make sure, and everyone knows that, and to debunk this, that we're not going to jump in and say, hey, get out of our way. This is our response now. What's most likely going to happen is an on-scene coordinator is going to arrive on site and say, hey, we're here to join Unified Command, work with the locals, figure out what needs to be done to clean up whatever spill or release has occurred. And so I just really want to make that clear. We can bring in a whole bunch of resources, which I'm going to get into later on in the presentation. Just with Stillwater, what happened there was we brought in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but we have access to over 14 other federal agencies that can help out on a response and deploy some of their resources to really help you all out. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. And so, unfortunately, what allows us to do things out on a response and help you all out and clean up these hazardous substance releases is because of our legislative authorities, and they were not preemptive. They're usually in place because something really terrible happened. With the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, that was because of the Times Beach incident, Love Canal. With the Clean Water Act and Oil Pollution Act, that was mainly the Cuyahoga river fire that occurred that kept lighting on fire, and the Exxon Valdez spill. With EPCRA, I'm sure you're all very familiar with the Bhopal incident when 45 tons of methyl isocyanate was released that killed thousands of people, if not more than that. And then the National Oil and Hazardous Substance Pollution Contingency Plan, NCP, that I was talking about earlier. As I mentioned, that's kind of our guidebook to how we respond to emergencies of those nature. That was actually developed because the Nixon administration decided that during Nixon's daughter while she was overseas in the UK, there was a tanker spill, and they kind of determined that there needed to be a national response plan to hazardous substance releases and oil spills. And so that's kind of how that came to be. CERCLA is going to be the one allowing us to clean up those hazardous substance dumpings, the facility releases, and so on. Clean Water Act and Oil Pollution Act is going to be allowing us to clean up those oil spills. EPCRA is going to be ensuring that we're planning appropriately for those chemical facility releases, developing those emergency response plans, coming up with notification procedures that are in place, and establishing the strong LEPCs that kind of control what is done with the planning process of preparing for a chemical facility release. And I think I've already mentioned the National Oil and Hazardous Substance Pollution Contingency Plan, NCP, how that's kind of our Bible for the EPA itself and how we respond to emergencies. And so everything that I'm talking about right now with these types of cleanups, these hazardous substance releases and oil spills are removal actions. And so I'm not talking about Superfund sites that take, months to clean up, if not years. I mean, I know some Superfund sites were originally put on the national priority list back when that law first came about. We're talking about situations that happen within 6 months, the cleanup itself, and cost less than $250,000. And so a removal action is essentially an action that stabilizes or cleans up a hazardous substance area. And basically that poses an immediate threat to human health and the environment. So if it's not causing immediate threat to human health and the environment, that's going to be under a whole different category and not under CERCLA 104 or the Clean Water Act 311C. And so those two provisions are going to be what allows us to do that immediate work to help out those local communities when these releases occur. And so CERCLA 104 does give us that discretion that I mentioned earlier, and the Clean Water Act 311C is going to be what allows us to clean up those oil spills, but actually requires us, regardless of the quantity, to go on site and help with the cleanup, even if it was just an ounce. If it was reported, we have to show up and we have to be there. And so all those various things on how we can help out on a response, go into our national response system. And so there are various components that allow us to be so effective. And so the national response team is kind of at the top of that level. That is essentially a planning, policy, and coordination group made of 15 federal agencies that the U.S. EPA and the U.S. Coast Guard co-chair together. And during a large incident response, such as East Palestine or something like that, the on-scene coordinators that are on scene that are running the IC position, incident commander position, are going to be able to directly access that advice and the various resources that are necessary to help out with that incident. And so on a smaller level, we actually have regional response teams. And so those are, there are 13 regional response teams still made up of federal agencies. And then the on-scene coordinators are going to be more regularly talking with them, or your specific regional response team, and giving them updates during a response or spill, getting technical expertise from these other federal agencies that might need to be involved, like the Fish and Wildlife Service or something along those lines, if it was a terrorist attack, potentially the FBI and so on. And then also calling in resources that maybe the EPA don't have direct access to, but other agencies do, that could potentially help all of us out in your communities. We have various special teams, which I'm going to get into in a little bit, but think radiation task force teams or various groups that can do radiation monitoring and so on. And plume modeling, sorry, that's what I meant to say. And then we also got our on-scene coordinators, which I'm going to talk about quite a bit on the next few slides. We got area committees, we got CERCs, LEPCs, Turks, and so on. And then we also got joint response teams with Canada and Mexico. I'm not going to dive too far into that, but those are essentially teams that are involved during cross-border incidents, as you can imagine. And then we also got industry, and they have their own response capabilities that can really benefit a response. Montana Rail took a big play during the Stillwater incident. They really helped out and brought in contractors, and they were able to take all the rail tankers out of the river, and then also rebuild the bridge within less than a month, which is pretty incredible. And so now I'm going to get on to talking about our on-scene coordinators. And so on the next slide, we can see that basically an on-scene coordinator is a highly trained individual that can be deployed anywhere in the entire country at a moment's notice, and that they coordinate emergency response actions that pose an immediate threat to human health and the environment. And they can do that by any means necessary, which is pretty incredible. They can sometimes work away from the law to remove a threat. And so they're going to be using their technical expertise to assist in assessing whether or not a potential hazard poses that immediate threat to human health and the environment. And they can do that by bringing in resources to help monitor, assess, create health and safety analysis, risk assessments, a whole variety of different disposal actions they can bring in. And so they have a lot of capabilities to help out your local emergency plan or just your local county in general. We have about 18 in Region 8 specifically. And so for those of you that don't know what Region 8 is, that makes up Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, and Colorado and Utah. And so those 18 OSCs help out with that area specifically, and they're usually out there several months a year, conducting removal actions when needed. But if there ever is a big response, such as East Palestine, that takes a very long period of time to clean up, then we also have access to those other on-scene coordinators from across the entire country to deploy. We've actually deployed over 300 people from the EPA, or I actually think it's over 600 at this point, to help out with that East Palestine incident. So we have a lot of people that can benefit from a spill or a response. We have the on-scene coordinators have various legal obligations. I'm not going to dive into too much of them today because I know we have limited time. But I just want to say that they're going to be coordinating with local governments, with emergency managers, and doing whatever they can to get out on the response as quickly as possible, and then dispose of the waste that is in that area as quickly as possible as well. So I mentioned a little bit earlier that we can deploy a lot of resources. Think the on-scene coordinators specifically, they can dress up in level A gear and monitor chemicals that are in a specific building. They can also bring in radiation task force teams that, can wave around fancy gauges to monitor whether or not there's radiation on site. They can bring in buses and planes that do plume modeling. As I said earlier, if there's some sort of terrorist attack, they can bring in extraction teams to get into the site and help out in those types of incidents as well. We have the Response Support Corps, as I mentioned before, that I monitor or manage, which is essentially that standing resource of volunteers that are trained in a variety of different disciplines that can deploy to a response, that are trained in ICS, usually have key leadership position training out on the IMT. They can just really help out a community. They're not going to be deployed like an on-scene coordinator would within 12 hours or something along those lines, but they can be out on site in 3 to 4 days as well. I've talked about these larger incidents a little bit, like East Palestine, and I just want to clarify that while on-scene coordinators are mainly focusing on those within 6 months removal actions, they can be extended if there is a very publicized incident or there's a really dangerous incident happening on site. They can conduct removal actions that occur with over $250,000 and that are over the 6-month period. It just really depends on the situation. And so this brings us to the Stillwater train derailment that I talked about a little bit before, but I'm going to kind of do a brief case study. I just want to make sure everyone's aware, though, that I'm not an on-scene coordinator, so I don't necessarily have the technical expertise as one. However, I have talked to an on-scene coordinator prior to this presentation, and they kind of gave me a lowdown of what happened, and I'll try to do the same for you. If there's any questions that I can't answer on this specific case study, I'll make sure to relay them to a bunch of on-scene coordinators and get you plenty of answers at a later date. But basically, in Reed Point, Montana, back in June 24th, there was 10 HazMat rail cars that went into the Yellowstone River that were made up of sodium hydrosulfide, asphalt liquefied petroleum, and molten sulfur. I don't believe the sodium hydrosulfide went into the river, but the petroleum car did. And so unified command was established pretty immediately with the fire departments and also with the potentially responsible party as Montana Rail Link, and then also DES, and then eventually the EPA once we got on site about a day later. And just keep in mind, we're not a first responding agency. And so, what I heard was that the Montana Rail Link rail cars actually derailed, which caused the bridge to collapse and eventually go into the river, not the other way around, which I think either way you look at it, it's not great with older infrastructure, and then also just rail cars going off the rails pretty often these days. But anyway, basically what happened was once Unified Command was established, the main goal was to remove those rail cars from the Yellowstone River, get them out, then start rebuilding the bridge and start doing an impact assessment river downstream, and so on. And so here's a good image of basically, the rail cars all in the river here. It's a tremendous amount of work considering how large the Yellowstone River is, and also during this time of year in June, the river's running pretty strong. And also the Yellowstone River is, I think it's the longest undammed river in the West. So that doesn't make it any better either for downstream effects. We were able to bring in the Fish and Wildlife Service to do an impact assessment. But essentially what started to happen was Montana Rail Link, which is incredibly good at this because they're just very experienced in this type of work. We're able to build out a causeway and then take out all the rail cars and then bring in contractors to help start rebuilding the bridge. And so on the next slide, you can kind of see what it looks like once that was completed. This was done within 3 weeks, and I believe they had trains going again in a month. So that's pretty incredible how quickly that can be done. And then on the next slide, you can kind of see some of the downstream effects of these tar balls. It's incredibly laborious to take all this guck out of the rocks, and then start cleaning them up and putting them in these bags. Contractors were mainly doing this, and the EPA was monitoring all of this and making sure that they were doing the correct work. And it went down over 120 miles, I believe, but most of the impacts were just down to 115 miles. And so you can imagine how many people are going to be involved in this type of work and how much time it can take. On the next slide, I have a brief video. Oh, no, I don't have a video because we weren't able to get the PowerPoint up, but this is just a PDF document. So just take my word for it. It can take a really long time to just take out a small little pile of these tar balls. It's incredibly strenuous, and it takes a really long time. And so here's a little slide that kind of shows that we cleaned up 200,000 pounds of these tar balls downstream of the river. There was no fish kill, which is great, and none of that sodium hydrosulfide was able to get in the river, which is also good. The impacts could have been a lot worse. But here you can kind of see a map of how far those chemicals went downstream. And then also in the top left, you can kind of see that over time, we were able to clean up more and more. And then by August, we were able to basically clean up a majority of, the tar balls that went downstream. According to Montana law, they guarantee a clean and healthful environment for its people, as I'm sure some of you know. And that can be a little bit difficult considering, after some time, we weren't able to financially, sustainably clean up more and more after a certain point. We had cleaned up most of it, and it was difficult to continue. And so we didn't think it was viable anymore to have the contractors go out there because there wasn't very much of it left. And you can kind of see that in the graphs. And so that's still under contention with my management and also the Montana government. We're under the position as of right now that we're going to just trust that it will eventually bioaccumulate into the environment and hopefully regenerate, and not be an issue for the environment in the future. You can disagree with that. I completely understand, but that's just kind of our stance on what's left of these tar balls downstream. But yeah, that's what I had to present today. I have in my backpack, I forget where I put it. But I have some trainings and exercises that, some HazMat teams can utilize, but also some LEPCs can learn about. So if you're interested in us giving some trainings, whether it's on Cameo or wanting to have a 40-hour HazWhopper to make sure that, some of your community members are prepared for hazardous substance release, we can definitely hold those. And we can also go over, what are the responsibilities of the LEPCs and how you should be interacting with facilities as well. We can also put on exercises too. So that's all I have today. Thank you so much for having me. This is, again, my first time in Montana for work. I've been here a number of times for vacation, but yeah, I'm excited to see what goes on for the rest of the LEPC meeting, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ben. Does anybody have any questions for Ben? Okay. Thank you again. Okay, what's up next is our pre-disaster mitigation plan update with Jake Halley from Integrated Solutions Consulting.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. I don't have a presentation today, but just a brief update on the status of where we are with everything. The group, for the most part, has had the opportunity to review the mitigation strategy that was sent last week. And through that process, thank you for all the respondents that came through on that. We'll be finalizing some of that information in a meeting tomorrow. And that, again, encompasses all of those projects and actions that were identified from the workshop, as well as some later actions that came in. So we want to ensure that we get all of that information into the plan update. And again, that's the big component that requires a lot of the legwork from the LEPC, as well as the steering committee that's involved in the planning process. So again, thank you for everybody's feedback on that. As soon as we get that information finalized and get it plugged into the document, in the next couple of days following that, we'll be sending out the full plan document draft so that we can get it actually submitted to the state as soon as possible for their initial state review and get it moving through the process. So we're getting close to the end of the planning process at this point. So just kind of wanted to give everybody an update on where we were at in the whole planning process. We had a few things. It's timed out pretty well right now because we've had some things with FEMA feedback from throughout different parts of the country right now where they've sort of changed some interpretations of the guidance. So it's kind of worked out well from that standpoint. So we've been able to hash out and iron out some of the details that FEMA's looking for now. But that's pretty much all I have for right now. If you have anything you need to add, Adrian, feel free to do so.
Nothing to add, Jacob. When we do get that final final first draft with all of the components in there as we intend to have them laid out, we will send it out to this group and welcome your feedback as well for those that haven't been involved in the planning committee or the steering committee.
Okay, thank you, Jake. Up next, we're going to have our National Weather Service update and fire outlook from Marty Whitmore. Is this the one we're on? We're on Chrome.
Back to the teams and share that.
I got to do one. Okay.
All right, thanks. So again, Marty Whitmore with the National Weather Service. Talk a little about weather. If you guys have any questions, throw them at me. I didn't prepare much. I just want to kind of do it off the cuff a little bit. But, summer was a pretty interesting one. We got a lot of questions about the heat because we had several kind of short duration episodes of heat where we had a few days over 100 degrees. And we started looking at, if you look at the highs, and that's what usually people think about when they're thinking about hot, it wasn't overly impressive, 23. Hotter than normal, certainly, but didn't really rank, I don't even think in the top 10 for when you just look at average highs. What was more remarkable, well, two things, was the very short-term duration of extreme heat. And like I say, we had, I think one episode, we had 4 days, I think over 100 degrees. That's a pretty rare event here in the valleys of western Montana. And then, but even more so, what caused 23 to be unusual for the summer were the overnight lows stayed really mild. during those events and in between. When you add in the average lows and the average highs, then 23 actually ranked in the top 5 for warmer than normal summers, which is kind of unique. And from a point of safety standpoint, when we start issuing heat advisories or excessive heat warnings, it's usually not just the daytime highs, it's whether the overnight you can get any relief. The health studies all indicate that's the key thing for far as the public health. And fortunately, that's not usually a big issue here in Western Montana, but it's also not a big issue usually in the Pacific Northwest, west of the Cascades, but it has been in recent years where Portland hit, I forget, 116 or some ridiculous temperature a couple, 3 summers ago. And of course, that's an area where not many people have air conditioning because they typically don't need it. So they had upwards of 200 fatalities, I think, in the Pacific Northwest a couple summers ago. So the Weather Service in general has been focusing even more on heat in areas that we don't typically message it. Fire season was getting pretty rambunctious for a while. Early starts, the Colt Fire up there around Seeley Lake or a little farther north, Lake Alva, was pretty early season, but we had some opportune precipitation events. An atmospheric river came in early on, and then we've got, if you remember, we had some remnants of that Hurricane Hillary off the Mexican coast that came up here. Obviously it was no longer a hurricane once it got inland, but we got some pretty good moisture out of that thing, and so that hit the Rockies, didn't hit Pacific Northwest that much, didn't even hit Northwest Montana a whole lot. And that's what, if you can see my screen up here, yeah, I'm showing the drought monitor, and this is initially a U.S. look. It's kind of nice, kind of interesting. Not just our area, I'll focus our area here a little bit, but across the southern tier of the U.S., they have some widespread drought. California used to look like this until, last winter. They had several atmospheric river events and took care of a lot of their issues. If we go, and this, I'll talk a little bit more about the South here in a minute when we get into the forecast, but you can zoom in on this particular website. There's several different places you can look at drought, but this particular website, you can zoom in a little bit more, and you can look at the different categories of drought. Northwest Montana has just struggled to get much precipitation for a long period of time. Most other areas have slowly improved. In fact, this is about a week old. We look at this every week, and when I say we, it's a host of agencies across the state, and the Weather Service just being one of them. And in our office, it's our hydrologist that focuses on that. And they have multiple disciplines across those agencies. So, of course, hydrologist, he's looking at stream flows, but there's other folks looking at soil moisture and state of health of the forest and things like that. They're going to actually make a change here. And I think right now, if we zoom in on kind of Missoula County, we show the southern half being abnormally dry and the northern half being moderately drought. We're going to improve each one of those by one category. So essentially, we've had enough moisture, and down here for you guys out of the Bitterroot, same thing. We're going to improve those. So it won't be really much droughty at all. Maybe the northern half of Missoula County will just be in that abnormally dry category. But really no relief up in Flathead, Lincoln, and western Sanders County, where you're seeing some pretty extreme droughty conditions up in that area. From a forecast standpoint, we've sort of transitioned, of course, into the fall, away from wildfire season. The land management agencies, particularly Forest Service, doing a lot of burning right now, so that's been kind of our focus. It's kind of interesting, though. We've had some ridges here lately that were pretty summer-like. This one that we just left, much above normal temperatures. I'm not sure what we finally hit yesterday, but had to be right around 80 degrees. Pretty unusual. Last night, if you saw the light show, we had some thunderstorms out there. Not a common event, not unheard of, but not common event for October. And then we were talking to some burners this morning, very surprised how poor the humidity recoveries were last night. Down in the Bitterroot, we saw a pretty good thermal belt. I think West Fork Ross was 70%. That's pretty good humidity recovery down the valley, but up in the mid slopes, it was stayed in the 30s. So they had some burning activity they had going on there that maybe overachieved overnight and surprised them a little bit. And it surprised us as well with this new system under the ridge. Thermal belts very common. With this transition to the trough that's inbound, we didn't think that thermal belt would maybe hold on last night. Tonight it probably will not. So we are in a change. If you've been following the weather a little bit, even outside, if you look up, you notice the weather's changing. Looks like a little convective out there. Today too, we got a trough coming in, and I'll show you. I'll open up a satellite, and these usually load pretty quickly, so we'll see. Now it starts at that. I don't really like that for what I want to show you, that scale. So I want to go to just look at the entire planet here. So this is a water vapor imagery that look at. It's great for seeing circulations in the upper atmosphere, highs and lows, and you can really compare it to models. So we use it a lot to see, are our models initializing well? But anyway, if you can't see it from the back in there, here's Western Montana right over here. So big, strong system, circulation out here off of Vancouver Island, directing a pretty moist flow into us. That thing that caused the thunderstorms last night was a mid-level front out in front of it, and now we're getting more probably a traditional cold front that's pushing the clouds in over us today. So pretty good chance of rain as we get into this evening and tonight. And I think that'll continue off and on through tomorrow. And then this system will move off, and we really get another ridge developing over us between this circulation and the one south of the Aleutians. So we're going to have another ridge pattern. I don't think it'll be as clean and summer-like as this ridge that we just encountered. In fact, there'll probably be some moisture flowing through it. Ridges often imply clear, dry weather, but sometimes we'll see what we call a dirty ridge. It's ridging. There's probably not a big chance of precipitation, but there's still cloud cover coming through it. So we'll see. But I think it'll be warmer than normal. And while we're on the short term, let's just look real quickly. Here's the radar loop that we link from our site, and you can see, let's see, so Missoula, we're sitting right around here. If you can see my cursor, and quite a bit of shower activity that's starting to develop around there. So, it's warm, sunny, but if you notice, the meteorologist did bring his raincoat into this meeting. So, don't like to be a pessimist, but there it is. Anyway, back to the long term, since humor's obviously not working. When we look at the mid and long term, it's not so much us doing the forecast, it's really the Climate Prediction Center, which is another branch of the Weather Service. We mainly just pass the information on to you, make sure it's accessible. So 6 to 10 out through 15 months is really coming from our Climate Prediction Center. And you've all seen the above normal, near normal, below normal type focus. And that's about the best you can really do with certainty. In the short term, you're a meteorologist. As the farther out you go, you become more of a statistician, really, and you're looking at probabilities of all the different model solutions and trying to compare with analogs to previous years and how did it look like this. So anyway, we've been warmer than normal, and it looks like in the 6 to 10 day forecast, which is look like the 16th through the 20th. Should put my glasses on if I'm going to bring them up. So it looks like we're really expected to stay warmer than normal, but we might start seeing a little bit of precipitation. That kind of continues in the 8 to 10, still a warmer than normal signature. And I just think that that ridge is going to be around with us for a while, but it might occasionally let some moisture through. Then on our climate page within our website, you can scroll down. We've already carried ourselves pretty much through October with that 8 to 14 day forecast. So I want to look at the 3-month forecast. And you can click on the site and you can just scroll right down month to month, these different forecasts. So we're trending into an El Nino pattern, or we have gotten to an El Nino pattern. And as a reminder, El Nino is when the equatorial Pacific, especially the eastern part of the equatorial Pacific near South America, has warmer than normal sea surface temperatures. That enhances the convection in that area, massive amounts of energy being released that's strong enough to really redirect where our storm track is typically over the northern hemisphere. And generally, it doesn't always work out, but generally El Niños point toward drier than normal winters for the northern tier of the U.S. and often for the Pacific Northwest, warmer than normal winters. It's not quite as good a correlation as its counterpart, La Nina, which we had 3 winters. Our past 3 winters were La Nina, colder than normal sea surface temperatures. That tends to have a better signature for big winters. But El Nino looks drier typically and warmer. So if you look at the October, November, December forecast, it is showing kind of a warm signature, particularly over the Pacific Northwest, but extending into western Montana, and a little bit of a drier signature. And same across the southern tier of the U.S., a little bit of a wet signature. If we go out another month, November, December, January, looks even more prominent, or I should say more El Nino looking. And then as we go into our core winter months, December, January, February, it certainly has that warm across the northern tier, not much across the southern tier for temps, but then dry to the north, wet in the south. So, you know, Texas, those areas that were showing pretty extreme widespread drought, I mean, they're hopeful, crossing their fingers that this is going to work out. Now for us, we don't necessarily like to see it. You all remember Flathead Lake was abnormally low, abnormally early this past year. If they don't get much snowpack, there's only so much they can do to hold on to water. You know, they got to release some. They got ecosystem management and recreation, all other kind of interests going on there. Power generation, things like that. So that's the forecast. I will say this, though. We've done some local studies that El Nino is not this simple as just drier than normal, below normal impact. It's messy. El Ninos are messier than La Ninas, I think. We've seen, if it gets strong El Ninos, at times we have some hyperactive months, you know, where we might have 2 months of the winter might be actually wetter than normal. But overall, they ended up drier than normal because of a real dry month. Also, you know, the Columbia Basin and whatnot, that's a good signature for warmer than normal. But here in the mountain valleys, we get cold air trapped all the time. Arctic outbreak will come down, cold air will sit here for a week or two with warm El Nino air riding over the top of it, results in like freezing rain or a mixed bag of precip, messy, uglier winter. That's what I worry about more with El Nino than I do with just all snow. From a forecast standpoint, all snow is a lot easier to forecast than a mixed bag. And of course, the road folks don't like dealing with freezing rain and application and removal and application of products. So anyway, that's what the forecast looks like, and that was way longer than I should have gone, but considering how little we know. Any questions?
All right. Okay. Thank you, Marty.
Thank you.
Okay, our next item is emergency alerts issued this quarter.
Stand by one, let me. Okay, it was actually kind of a busy quarter for emergency alerts. We had, of course, the national IPAWS, which is the Integrated Public Alerts and Warning System test that was conducted on Wednesday, October 4th. Just out of curiosity, by show of hands, how many people received that? Which is a market improvement for those of you online. We had almost probably 90% of folks raise their hand. If you will recall, they did a national test 3 years ago, and it was reported that about 50% of U.S. citizens received that on their mobile devices. So good outcome on that. For us here locally, in the last quarter, we issued 16 total alerts. 2 of those were our own internal integrated public alerts and warning tests. Those don't go out to the public. That is just sending our tests using our equipment to the FEMA lab to confirm that we still are able to do that should the need arise. We did have 5 alerts relative to fire evacuations, some, as Marty mentioned, for the Colt Lake fire, and then for the fire that was down in Lolo, very fast moving on a red flag day. We had 4 law enforcement initiated alerts relative to missing children, and then 5 shelter in place, again, law enforcement alerts. And some of those alerts are the initial alert notifying the public of the event, and then some of those are cancellation alerts once the resolve had occurred.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. Okay, next is the LEPC Standing Committee reports and updates. The first is the IMT Oversight Committee.
The Oversight Committee did not meet in the last quarter, but just by way of an update, our local incident management team was deployed a couple times this summer, once to the gravel pit fire, which was just outside of south of Libby. They were there for a 14-day assignment, and then they were also deployed to the Colt Lake fire up in Sealy for another 14 days, kind of putting that fire to bed.
Okay, and then the Access and Functional Needs, AFN Committee.
Hi, everybody. This is Julia from Missoula Public Health. I chair the AFN committee. Very excited to share that we've been meeting regularly this year. Most recently, we've come up with some goals and objectives for the group to move forward. It's kind of been haphazard for a long time, so we're gathering some more input from our partners, but so far it looks like we're going to be really focusing on our efforts on promoting Smart 911, a comms checklist, and just checking in with our partners and learning more about what they do. So in an event of an emergency, it's not the first time we're meeting or talking about complex issues. I can also speak for the heat calls. Again, very excited to share that we are starting to meet quarterly again. Our last meeting was kind of a reconnection meeting and, of course, discussing COVID, which is on the rise again. So wash your hands and mask when you feel necessary, and syphilis as well is going around. So those were the 2 things we discussed the most.
Okay, thank you, Julia. Next on the agenda is grants. And the first one, the Homeland Security Grant update.
So by way of update, we do currently have an open Homeland Security grant from federal fiscal year 21. For everybody's collective memory, that is just shy of a $500,000 grant that Missoula County received to build a mobile command vehicle. We have an extension on that grant. I think, as anybody knows who's tried to buy anything lately in the last year, supply chain disruptions have kind of caused us to be a little bit behind schedule on that. But we are anticipating delivery of that asset in the next month or so. Hopeful that we'll have some home Grizz games to do some kicking the tires on with some of our agency partners. And once we get it here to Missoula, we'll kind of ramp up our planning committee that's been working on that, again, once we have hands on it, to do the kind of the final upfitting of that vehicle. And then in this last round of Homeland Security, our office applied for a community resilience component of the Homeland Security Grant Program to do a CPR, community CPR initiative. This is kind of a twofold grant process for us in that we intend to do a lot of community CPR, hands-only CPR instruction, not only working with Missoula County Public Schools, University of Montana, but also just pop-up stands at the mall, farmers markets, where we can capture somebody for 10, 15 minutes, teach them how to do CPR. But then also rolling out Pulse Point, which is a community application that for those that are trained in CPR, when a CPR call is initiated into our 911 center, if you happen to be within proximity of that call and it's in a public place, so not in someone's home, you would get a notification in the hopes that you would be able to go render immediate CPR, which we know is the best way of saving lives. But it also is a way to map and catalog all of the automated external defibrillators that we have in our community. That grant started on October 1st. We just got the grant award paperwork last week, and so we'll be ramping up our planning efforts on that soon.
Okay, thank you. Next is the upcoming training exercises.
So by way of formal trainings and exercises, I know the pipeline folks are going to be doing their kind of annual training for first responders in several communities throughout Montana. Missoula's is coming up. I'm looking out to our pipeline folks. we can send that out for anyone who's interested in that one. Our office additionally was recently engaged by both the Upper and Lower Rattlesnake Leadership Councils, part of their neighborhood councils, to talk through kind of evacuations and what that looks like. And so we'll be planning to do a kind of a workshop, tabletop hybrid with both of those groups in April to talk through different scenarios, what evacuation looks like, how those decisions are made, and kind of what to expect as someone who maybe lives in that area should those situations arise.
Okay, next is local and statewide hazmat incidents since the last meeting.
I didn't see anyone from either Missoula Rural or City Fire in attendance from the hazmat team perspective. There we are. No local incidents.
Okay, thank you. All right, our last item then is our roundtable and any other business that you would like to discuss at this time.
I have one item just for kind of the good of the group. More information to come on this, but Missoula County was selected through a partnership with FEMA Region 8 for their integrated preparedness approach through the National Preparedness Division of FEMA Region 8. We had an initial kickoff meeting in June, and then we just had a follow-up meeting here in the last 3 weeks. The purpose of this and the hope and the intent is that over the next 18 months, we can really take a deep dive into what some gaps are within our community. And kind of the overarching theme is creating a culture of preparedness amongst not only our citizens, but also our response agencies. And so there will be more to come as we start to kind of flush out what that looks like. Ideally, and what we intend to have that look like are series of workshops, trainings, and hopefully some exercises as well as kind of taking a deep dive into our emergency operations plan and just shoring that up in areas that we may have some gaps.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. Anyone else? Yes. No? Okay.
Tracy, see your hand raised.
Hey there. So this is Tracy Campbell, City of Missoula Public Works Stormwater. I just want to let the group know that Parks and Rec and I purchased a 50-foot turbidity curtain that can be deployed in the river or aquatic environments to prevent pollutants from making its way downriver. So if that's ever needed, I just want to let you know that is a tool that is available.
Thank you, Tracy.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, then I will go ahead and need a motion to close the October meeting.
So moved.
Okay. All right, do I have a second? Okay, thank you. All right, so thanks everybody for coming, and hope to see everybody again in January.